Good afternoon, everybody. It is Saturday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined today by Bryan Batko, our Steelers beat reporter, for the latest Steelers mock draft tracker video. Bryan, how are you?
Doing well, Adam. I can attest that, in my Steelers mailbag Friday on the Post-Gazette website, still plenty of draft questions. Everybody wants to talk about the draft all the time, it seems like. It's going to be nice to have one more game of actual football to watch on Sunday between the Eagles and the Chiefs. And from there on out, it's, guys running around in spandex, jumping to see how high they can touch a bar and, running as fast as they can for 40 yards.
Bryan, I got to tell you, it's nice to be doing a video on Friday morning recording something with you on Friday mornings like we used to do with the old Post-Gazette Roundtable show.
Yeah, that is quite a throwback. I think the recently retired Jerry Micko used to be the brains behind that operation, maybe. So, it was also a throwback for Ray and I to record the North Shore Drive podcast with Chris Carter out, because that's truly the grassroots where it all began for the Post-Gazette Steelers podcasting world, a little Chip Hammond football action. So hopefully if you didn't see that, go find that on the feed. Ray and I chopped up a lot of his first iteration of a 2023 7-round mock draft. And we also talked a lot about the upcoming Super Bowl too.
Yeah, definitely check out what Ray has to say, because he does a great job with that, I think 3 or 4 times during draft season. So the first one's out. Check out that previous video. But you're here for our mock draft tracker video, which if you're just joining us for the first time, every week at the Post-Gazette, on the Post-Gazette website, kind of recap all of the picks that we're seeing across the internet for the Steelers mock drafts in a given week, just kind of seeing what the national pundits are saying, if there's any trends emerging. And then, we're just going to come here and discuss them, with me, Bryan, Christopher Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. A lot of people are going to be coming through this show. This week, it's me and Bryan talking about the picks. And Bryan, a name that came up a lot this week, and has, honestly, this name has come up a lot locally because of his Pittsburgh and Penn State ties. It's Joey Porter Jr., son of former Steelers linebacker Joey Porter. I feel like we talk about him a lot around here for obvious reasons. We love a parochial pick in Pittsburgh. That's why the Kenny Pickett pick was so popular. Go back to, a little bit to James Conner. But there were a lot of national pundits making that connection this week, not just us local people talking about it. How seriously do you think Joey Porter is on the Steelers' radar? Is he a top 5 name that we need to be looking at as a possibility for this pick?
Yeah, I think so, based on the connection here of familiarity and positional need for the Steelers. And for everybody out there that's like dunking on this momentum for Joey Porter Jr., deriding it as overly simplified because he's from here and his dad played here or whatever, did you sleep through the 2022 draft? The Steelers literally picked the quarterback who was across the hall from them for the last 5 seasons. Why did they do that? Well, according to them, one of the biggest factors in that was they had a chance to be around him and get to know him for 5 years. They saw him up close and personal. Mike Tomlin, had conversations with him here and there. Art Rooney II was even kind of able to observe him, I think, in that capacity. And they needed a quarterback. They wanted to find their franchise guy for the future. That's essentially where they are right now with the 17th overall pick. When you look at their defense, specifically cornerback, they've swung and missed far too many times on this position, especially in the draft. Their best coup through that means recently has been Cam Sutton. Of course, we're speculating. These mock drafts in early February, there's even more speculation at play because free agency hasn't even happened yet. But I think, widely assume they'll find a way to bring him back and he'll want to come back. But other than getting him in the 3rd round in 2017, it's been a Joe Hayden, free agent kind of rescue mission that has saved them at that position. So that's why it does make all the sense in the world. We'll have a lot more data points on Porter specifically through the combine, through his pro day up there in State College. But for right now, there's no reason to look your nose down or, forgive the pun, mock people projecting Joey Porter Jr. to the Steelers, because it's kind of what they do, and it makes sense even if his name was Adam Batko Jr.
Yeah, what do you think of this conspiracy theory that's been floating around with Kenny Pickett this past season that it was the Penn State fans in the fan base didn't like him. Now we're kind of on the other side. We're talking about a Penn State guy potentially in the first round. Do you buy in at all to the theory that there's resentment in the fan base for guys from the other school?
Not really. I mean, it depends on your level of fandom. If you're somebody who maybe prioritizes your college team over your pro team, then yeah, maybe old habits die hard in that way, or it's difficult to overcome that, human nature bias that you have against certain players that you may have rooted against. But, with Joey Porter Jr., he's not just a Penn State alum. He's not just a son of a legendary. Is legendary too strong for Joey Porter? He was like, statistically not a legend, but he really embodied those early to mid 2000s teams, don't you think, Adam? You grew up around here as well.
He was the spiritual core, I think, of those teams, and there were certainly other guys on that list, but I think he was, in terms of the leadership and the mood, kind of the locker room guy. I would agree.
Yeah, he was the tone setter. He wasn't the best player out of all of them, but yeah, I think in terms of the guy who set the temperature for that team, it was him. He was a fan favorite. But even beyond that, Joey Porter Jr. also, he grew up here with his dad being a Steeler. I mean, he went to North Allegheny High School. People who went to Pine Richland, Seneca Valley, Butler, North Hills, whatever, they probably got to see him a lot on that stage. So it would be cool. And as far as these like quote unquote too obvious picks or projections, not only did the Steelers take Kenny Pickett in the first round last year, everybody could have seen it coming for them to take Cam Hayward's little brother. And that's exactly what they did in the 6th round with Connor Hayward. So again, the Steelers do these things. We're not trying to pigeonhole them taking Joey Porter's first round projected son, who's an outside linebacker like he was. No, he's a corner, and the Steelers don't have many answers at that position already. So it just, there's a ton of reasons why this is gaining steam locally and nationally. And it's been that way really since probably the middle to the end of last season, when it became clear that he was not going to be back at Penn State and he was going to be one of the top corners in this draft.
I think one of the more legit knocks on his game, not that he went to Penn State, but what he did while he was there, was that he didn't make a ton of splash plays. He wasn't picking off a ton of passes. He wasn't that guy on that defense. Is that a concern for you? Is that something that you'd be looking for from a Joey Porter, or do the Steelers just need a guy who can reliably cover and kind of let guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick make those big plays in the secondary?
I mean, it's a concern to some degree. You want your corners to catch the ball when it comes their way. We saw the Steelers lose a game or two this past season when they didn't make those plays, and Mike Tomlin was pretty upfront about that. And if you pay close attention to his Tuesday press conferences, he usually likes to note guys on the other team who do have a lot of ball production. I think it was might have been Kevin Byard, the All-Pro Titans safety who they played a couple years ago, who he said, I should have known that he was going to be this good when I scouted him in college and he had all these interceptions. So I think Tomlin gravitates toward guys like that, but we've also seen the Steelers thrive with corners who, they didn't really make their reputation off picking off passes. Ike Taylor, of course, at the top of that list. And so much of that too is circumstantial. I haven't combed through every Joey Porter Jr. cut up of his PBUs, how many of them should have been picked. He does get his hand on a lot of balls. I think he had 11 breakups last season. So at least he's in position for that. Maybe you can coach up the sort of opportunistic ball hawking aspect of it. But yeah, even if he's not a guy who comes in and is putting up Trayvon Diggs level interception numbers, you just need somebody who can try to take away half the field, especially in a division with a Jamar Chase and Deshaun Watson. I think will settle in, and he's got Amari Cooper as a clear-cut number one. That could be what takes this defense sort of to the next level. They really haven't had that guy, and as we've seen around the league, it's difficult to get that guy unless you're willing to spend a lot of money, and that's simply not realistic for the Steelers, given what they're paying their big three on defense.
One of the more interesting mock drafts I looked at this week was one of the first I saw that had Christian Gonzalez falling to the Steelers. I know he's a guy that Chris Carter, if you listen to the North Shore Drive, if you listen to last week's show, that's a guy that Chris is really high on. I think there's a lot of pundits who are high on him. I've seen him go as high as number 6 to Detroit. Bryan, is he your CB1? And if he falls to the Steelers, is he one of those, can't pass up type of guys?
I'm not sure yet. And as far as the cornerback class, it seems like it is pretty good at the top. You've got some people who think it's Gonzalez. I don't know that Porter's garnered quite that much praise just yet, but Devin Witherspoon from Illinois is another really buzzy name that it seems like when the preeminent draft gurus really started diving into the tape after the college season, more and more guys were throwing him out as the number one corner in this class. So a lot to like about Gonzalez. I mean, he does have more of the interception production that we just talked about. Joey Porter kind of lacking on his resume. His speed jumps off the tape at you, especially when you see him, jump a route and he's just flying the other way. He's got the size at 6'2", transferred to Oregon from Colorado. So, could some of it be he thrived in a better defense, a system more suited to his game? That's what NFL evaluators will have to study. I think he's right up there in the mix. What's an interesting dynamic to me, Adam, and it kind of ties back in with where we started this podcast, the jumping off point. How difficult would it be for the Steelers to look at two guys at the same position with a lot of the similar physical attributes, a lot of what you like, and maybe some of the same weaknesses, and not pick the homegrown kid when we've heard them say ad nauseum how much they like drafting players with dads or brothers who played in the league, because it tells you something, not just about the bloodlines, but the football character, what's been instilled in them. So that I think is not much ado about nothing. It's almost part of the core philosophy for the Steelers and kind of some of what they use to set their draft boards and maybe even as tiebreakers in some instances.
Yeah, I think that'd be interesting to see if there was a hypothetical, Christian Gonzalez or potentially Devin Witherspoon, Joey Porter all being available. What do the Steelers do in that position, given that, I think the national perception is that those guys are a little bit better than Joey Porter, and that Joey Porter is the kind of guy you'd look at number 17, but maybe not necessarily in the top 5 or 6. So, yeah, I think it's a very interesting hypothetical, given the things that they've been saying the past year about Kenny Pickett and those local ties. Bryan, another interesting angle in this Matt Miller mock draft on ESPN was in the second round at number 32, that pick they got from the Chase Claypool trade. He has the Steelers going with John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota, who is a powerful run blocker. He's a big guy, but we haven't really talked about center as a position of need, at the top end of the draft. Mason Cole obviously did a decent job there this season. I think we've spent a lot more time talking about the tackles because I think to the extent there were weaknesses on the offensive line, people perceived those to be the spots. What do you think, first of all, before we get into Schmitz, because I think he's an interesting philosophical case for the Steelers. What do you think generally of the concept of chasing a center at the top of the draft?
I don't love it. I think the Mason Cole signing last year kind of filled that gap for you a little bit. I mean, the name last year that was on everybody's radar was Tyler Linderbaum from Iowa. And, you had a lot of Steelers fans pounding the table for, hey, draft this guy 20th overall, set it and forget it in the middle of your offensive line for the next decade and do what you should have done with Creed Humphrey a couple years back. They ultimately didn't go that route, and signing Cole in free agency, as not to mention James Daniels, because that filled a guard spot on your line too. That essentially signaled to everybody that they weren't going to go that route with Linderbaum. So, I wouldn't do it again here. I think Cole was, serviceable last year at worst and even played pretty well toward the end of the season at that spot. I think you've got other needs that you could look to. I suppose it comes down to a little bit of a sort of, kind of as you alluded to, philosophical discussion of, hey, is Mason Cole just the guy essentially? Can you not pass up on somebody like John Michael Schmitz, who maybe is your anchor for the next decade at that important position? You kind of tried to hit that with Kendrick Green a couple years ago. We saw how that worked out. So I guess I understand that. The Steelers traditionally have always had a really strong center from Marquise Pouncey, Dermontti Dawson, Mike Webster. That lineage is legit. But Schmitz he's a fifth-year guy, I believe, from Minnesota. So it's not like he's some sort of can't miss. He maybe a little bit of a late bloomer. I know he was jumping off the page to people at the Senior Bowl. So I won't completely roll it out, but it's not really what I would do.
Yeah, I think part of, I'm leading into the question about philosophy. He's also not, I think, in that Dermontti Dawson, Marquise Pouncey, athletic, blocking type that we've seen the Steelers value a lot in the past and invest, decades in, honestly. Do you think that that's still the philosophy for the Steelers to the extent that they might be looking at a center? Do you think they still want a guy who's more like Dermontti Dawson or Marquise Pouncey, or do you think that at that point, I think they drafted Marquise Pouncey in 2010. Is that ancient history at this point? Or are you just looking for possibly the best guy you can get at a position?
Yeah, I think they're just looking for the best guy they can get at that spot. I mean, positional fit. They kind of tried to go that route with Kendrick Green. We heard all about his nastiness and his, what would he run, like a 4.8 40. So it was kind of this question of yeah, he's undersized, but we believe in all the other parts of it, the tangible and the intangible aspects. And sometimes, I think that just went to prove that you got to know how to play that position. It's a very cerebral position, center is. And, Schmitz, he might be a really good one in the NFL. How much of an upgrade would he be over a Mason Cole? That I think is a lot more difficult to take a stance on it, at least at this point. So I also, the other final note on him, from what I've seen, it doesn't seem like he's somebody with a ton of versatility. I haven't seen any draft experts or Big Ten experts saying that Schmitz could also play guard. Generally, I think the Steelers could use some more flexibility on their offensive line, some more depth. So that's another reason why I think if you're going to go O-line that early, whether it's at 17 or at 32, get somebody who can maybe play both tackle spots, maybe play tackle or guard or center. That would be kind of the last thing to keep in mind on that front.
Another name that popped up on a couple of mock drafts this week that I thought, was pretty interesting was Clemson's Bryan Bresee. He is a defensive lineman. He was I think he was the number one player in the country coming out of high school. And then he's, in his last couple of years with the Tigers, he's been hurt. I think he's played only 12 games. I think he had 5 sacks in those 2 seasons. So his numbers don't jump off the page, but some scouts really love him. They think he's the total package of, power and athleticism and everything you're looking for in an edge rusher. What do you think of him if he's available at 17, if he drops because of those injury concerns? Is he a wild card pick the Steelers might, be interested in, or is he possibly a bit too risky for them given, everything they have at stake in this draft?
Well, I don't think I'd consider him an edge rusher at all. I think he's more of an interior defensive lineman. If you're playing next to Cam Hayward in the nickel or dime, I mean, yeah, you might get matched up with a tackle or something like that. And I know Ray Fittipaldo was really big on Iowa's Lucas Van Ness as a 5 technique. He's hybrid, tweener, whatever you want to call him. But I think Bresee is more of a natural inside power guy. And I would like that pick for the Steelers, I think. I mean, like you said, dogged by injuries, but I think that was more of the reason for the production not really meeting expectations for him, because from what I've, seen and read from people at Clemson, I mean, he's a hardworking guy. He wasn't just a 5-star number one in his class recruit who kind of coasted along once he got to college. I mean, I think he's a very high character player. Dabo Sweeney, always says great things about him. He's got a kind of an interesting backstory too. He was on one of those game day features. A family member of his has gone through some tough times. I don't know the exact specifics, but if you want to look him up, you can definitely find that. So he would be, to me, as long as you're okay with the health. And I should point out the Steelers have shied away from some guys recently with some of those health concerns. Landon Dickerson, the center/guard from Alabama, I think it was a couple years ago, had all those knee injuries. And, the Steelers could have been in the market for a young offensive lineman at that point. They went a different direction. So maybe they don't want to take that chance, especially at 17th overall. But if everything checks out well with Bresee, I think he'd be a good fit. I think he'd be the type of player they could use on this defensive line from day one and develop into kind of that next Cam Hayward type down the line. He'd be somebody ideal to learn behind Hayward and kind of, uphold the Steelers tradition to some degree, just given everything I've heard about him.
You mentioned Ray Fittipaldo's first mock draft of the season. He does a great job with that, and he's very thoughtful. And I think he puts some names on the radar. This week it was Lucas Van Ness. Pair him with those picks for Bresee. To what extent should defensive line be on people's radars nationally? Because I think we've seen a lot of the attention go to the offensive linemen, a lot of attention go to the cornerbacks for obvious reasons. Those are definitely positions of need. But sometimes I feel like with these mock drafts, things kind of snowball, and you kind of like people get blinders to what the Steelers' other needs are. Obviously, they have that need along the defensive line. To what extent do you think that that's something that they really do, seriously might want to address at the top of the draft compared to what, the trendy picks have been for these first couple of weeks before we get into combine season?
Yeah, I think to me, it just speaks to that imbalance that you try to strike every year in the draft between best player available versus filling holes on your roster. Maybe the best player available will be an outside linebacker at 17, but that's a guy who's not really going to be on the field most of the time. I mean, don't you want this first round pick to be somebody who's going to be in your top 11 on offense or defense? I would think so. I understand drafting for the future and the present, developmental players to some degree and trying to thread that needle. But for my money, where the Steelers are right now with this kind of window closing with Cam Hayward still playing at a high level, TJ Watt and Minkah Fitzpatrick, I'd say firmly in their prime, and Kenny Pickett on his rookie deal, along with Najee Harris, George Pickens. This is a time to strike in some sense. So I get you got to be patient. You got to look down the line too. But at least at 17, I want somebody who can make an instant impact. And if you're going to get a defensive lineman in that spot, I don't think it can be this classic nose tackle, two gapper who's going to be good against the run. Maybe look at that spot at 32 or 49, because I don't think they have that guy. Montravius Adams didn't do a lot for me last year. Tyson Aluwalu, I'd be surprised if he doesn't hang it up, or at the very least, he's not going to be back here. So I think that's a need, but I think if you go D-line in the first round, it better be somebody who kind of has a little bit of everything in his bag. And I think Bryan Bresee, at least when he's right, has that. He can be a 3-down player, be good against the run, get after the quarterback. So it's right up there for me in the holy trinity of Steelers draft needs as we sit here on February, 10th, February 10th, with O-line and corner.
Yeah, I like the way you put it as the Holy Trinity, because I don't know if it's been seen that way. And I think this week was interesting that we finally maybe started to see it emerge as like not a duality.
Yeah. Inside linebacker sneaks in there for some people. I get that. I just personally would have some hesitation trying to hit the bullseye on that position 4 years after the Devin Bush experiment went so awry.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just when there's, I think that was such an obvious need that season that it made sense for the Steelers at that point to kind of go that way. I don't know that it does now to kind of chase things. I think that's the beauty of this draft, is I don't think you have to chase. I don't think we have to be talking about trade ups. I don't think we have to be, they have enough capital at the top that they can kind of let things, come to them. So I agree with you on that front. Bryan, one other name I wanted to bring up before we sign off here is Dawand Jones from Ohio State. The mountain of a man who was protecting C.J. Stroud this past season. He impressed a lot of people at workouts at the Senior Bowl. Our Ray Fittlepaldo was there. He likes Dawand Jones. I believe he was in Ray's 7-round mock draft. I saw a couple picks for him in the 2nd round. Is he another name that's got to be like right at the top of the list of a guy who really could end up in Pittsburgh, regardless of where? But I feel like he's right in that range of they're probably going to get 2 or 3 shots at him, and it seems like hard to imagine that they aren't going to give him a hard look.
Yeah, from what I saw from Ray's Twitter feed and others, Mike Tomlin was getting an up close and personal look at a lot of those offensive linemen down there in Mobile, and so was Andy Weidel, and we saw how instrumental he was in building this Eagles offensive line that is arguably the best in the NFL. So Dawand Jones, did the mock that you saw, did they have him going to the Steelers in the 1st round?
Yeah, I saw one mock that had him in the 1st, and I had one mock that was I think they actually had him at 49.
Yeah, I don't think as a 1st rounder. He was a right tackle exclusively at Ohio State. The Steelers have Chuks Okorafor. I think if you were ranking within the offensive line need, what position they need the most, right tackle would not be at the top. And if you're going to, and Ray and I talked a lot about Dawand Jones on our episode Friday. It's just a lot of projection for me to think, okay, he can flip sides. He's got the length and the lateral quickness and the footwork to do it, but you haven't seen it. So you'd really be, you'd be taking a little bit of a shot there to do that. So I think that would be a reach at 17, but Yeah, I mean, the physical tools, I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers get enamored with that and do see him as kind of best prospect available at 32 or especially 49 if he falls that far.
Yeah, and it's just interesting to see when we go through the evaluation period how things might change, because he's a guy who, I think at least checked the box of did well at the college all-star games, but
and it's early. We haven't had the combine, we haven't had the pro days. Like the guys who do well in the Senior Bowl, especially, or even at some of these other lower level all-star games, they're like the horse in a race that gets off to a really fast start, and it's like, all right, he's going well right now, but there's still a couple laps around the track here.
Yeah, we need more data points. I think to kind of put a bookend on this video, I think he's right there with Joey Porter of, let's see the numbers. Let's see what he does in these workouts and see if that holds up to scrutiny as well as, some of this early kind of projection suggests. So, yeah, I think him and Joey Porter are two of the guys I'm most curious to see what happens with the rest of the way. Bryan, any final thoughts on another week of mock draft tracking?
I was just going to say, I mean, to your point there at the very end, we know the Steelers like the Big Ten. So they have gone back to that well often, whether it's Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State. And, obviously Ray had Van Ness from Iowa in there. We talked at length about John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota. Maybe next time I'm on this, we can talk about anybody from a different conference. So, but again, that is very much in line with where the Steelers have relied on their scouting the most, where they have found the most prospects. We know Mike Tomlin appreciates guys who do it against good competition. So it's mock draft season. I can tell you from my mailbag, everybody wants to talk about the draft all the time, and that'll ramp up even more following the Super Bowl. A brief respite from free agency, but yeah, full speed ahead till the end of April.
Absolutely. Bryan, thanks for stopping by today. If you're just joining us for the first time on YouTube, please pop a like on this video. Help us out with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos. We will be doing this show every Saturday from now until the draft. We'll also have plenty of draft talk on the North Shore Drive with Chris Carter when he comes back from vacation next week. Bryan is a frequent guest, so if you liked what Bryan had to say, you're going to see plenty of him. You'll see plenty of me hosting our other shows as well. And of course, please check out the subscription deal down in the description. $6 for 6 months of access to post-gazette.com. Everything Bryan's writing, everything I'm writing, everything Ray Fittipaldo, who we've mentioned a lot, is writing. You're going to get all of that for just $1 a month. It's a great deal. Pirate Spring Training is going to be starting up here soon. Jason Mackey's going to be down in Bradenton, Florida. So you're going to want to be signed up for all of that too. Otherwise, we're going to talk to you guys next week. Hopefully we'll have a new slate of prospects to talk about. Bryan, one final thank you for stopping by.
Yeah, no problem, Adam. Let's do it again soon.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.